Hi, folks. This is Elizabeth Sillick LaRue, Esquire, the Conscientious Immigrant. And I decided, because I did record my first voiceover podcast contribution yesterday, I enjoyed it. And so I decided I would continue to do this. And next up is a read of my article that was the most popular article that I've written on Substack, called How to Avoid Being an Ugly American in quotes. And just before I launch into reading it, I would just note that I wrote this only a year after moving to Mexico. And so a lot has transpired since then. I published this on Substack on December 26, 2024. And there's been a lot of change and upheaval and very disturbing developments, obviously, in the United States since the inauguration. My work since then has largely been focused on helping marginalized people leave the U.S. and less on global impact. However, I will say that I only work with people that get it and that know enough not to be quote unquote ugly Americans. Nonetheless, I will launch into this because it was a very popular article. I think a lot of people appreciated it. Some people were offended, and as they say, hit dogs holler. So I'm not particularly concerned about the people who are offended, because if you don't do this stuff, then you shouldn't be offended. I will post the link to the article, which includes a photo that I snapped of a group of U.S. tourists who were staring down and glaring down my husband and I as we worked at a local restaurant that actually encouraged and invited digital nomads and others who work remotely to do so. And so we had every right to be there and do what we were doing, and nevertheless, they were clearly agitated at the fact of our existence. In any event, I characterize them as ugly Americans. All right, without further ado, here we go. How to avoid being an ugly American. 9 behaviors no one wants imported from the USA. By me. I wish I didn't have to write this. Today marks exactly 1 year since my husband, me, and our 2 dogs crept across the Texas-Mexico border in the early morning hours, our 2-door Honda battered by flying beetles and the sun streaming across our faces. I've written several blogs about what led us to make the decision to emigrate. Chief among them was, simply put, Americans. I use quotes because everyone from both American continents is American. But in typical egocentric form, the United States of America has co-opted the term and failed to translate the more accurate Spanish word, Estadounidense. It's a hard word to say. Yes, this is paradoxical. I was born and raised in New York and subsequently lived in the DMV area and Florida. I am an Estadounidense, a gringa even. And yes, I wanted to get away from the majority of people from my homeland. I knew that moving to a destination that's popular with tourists meant that this wouldn't be wholly achieved. For our purposes, that's okay. We still encounter obnoxious tourists and self-labeled expats, but it's rare, and unlike in Florida, they do not hold power. Nevertheless, some of the behavior and attitudes of USers who we encountered here on the island of Cozumel, as well as in online social media groups for people who have emigrated from or spent significant amounts of time out of the US, makes me cringe hard. It's not news, of course. The term, quote-unquote, ugly American is literally in the dictionary. And before you get bent out of shape over the use of the term ugly, in this context, it refers to abhorrent behavior. And trust me, we have earned it. So, with 1 year under my belt, I figured I'd put out some recommendations for how you, U.S. immigrant, can avoid being a witless, obtrusive trope. And yes, our family abides by this list and seeks other ways we can be better. Follow-up article to come. Number 1, follow the law. Seems pretty obvious, right? Not for ugly Americans. You would be shocked by how many people ask for advice in social media groups aimed at quote-unquote expats on how to get away with illegally immigrating to Latin American countries, how to evade taxes, how to work illegally, and to generally carry out their belief that the law doesn't apply to them. Offline, it's not unusual to see USers speeding, driving where they aren't supposed to, standing right in front of prohibition signs, and doing the exact thing that is prohibited, whether it be smoking or slathering on sunscreen before they dunk their greasy bodies into coral reef habitats. In case you didn't know, sunscreens kill corals. It's the lack of discretion that's most appalling. Number 2, be respectful. Hell hath no fury like a USer who gets irritated with someone they believe was created to serve them. It's apparent when this attitude is present, barking orders at servers, berating clerks, demanding attention from immigration agents. I've written about particular incidents on our blog on Patreon where I actually intervened and said something. It is incomprehensible to me that USers would come to another person's country and behave so completely disrespectfully, and in particular when completely unprovoked. So gross, so cringe. Number 3, stop being cheap. USers love to issue warnings in online expat forums about attempts to quote-unquote scam them. Don't mistake my meaning. I'm not talking about serious scams concerning housing fraud, illegal bank wires, etc., the types of criminal and predatory behavior that merits a warning. I'm talking about slight overcharges on the restaurant bill, clandestinely added tips, skimming at the gas station. From the way these scams are reported, you'd think people are getting their bank accounts cleared out. Here's the reality in Mexico. Minimum wage is equivalent to roughly $10 USD per day. Almost all USers, even those on low fixed incomes, are probably earning more than the people who may have added a $3 USD charge to the grocery bill. I'm not saying it's okay. I am saying it's not something to make a federal case over. Yes, theft is wrong. In these contexts, however, it's also a logical result of an obscene financial disparity that you are probably flaunting in folks' faces. Let the $3 go. Number 4, educate yourself. Learn the history of the place where you live, especially if you live in a formerly colonized country. Learn about the socioeconomic situation of the nation, the state, and the municipality where you live. Educate yourself on the geopolitical dynamics that color the history and current international relations between the U.S. and the country you inhabit. Let this education foster understanding. Number 5, learn and speak the language. As someone who studies Spanish every day through a variety of mechanisms, even though I have a decent working proficiency, I can say that speaking in your non-native tongue takes a lot of brain power. Don't impose that on people in their own nation. There are a number of free resources available to help you learn. I love Duolingo. And there's really no excuse for not learning the basics of the dominant language of the country in which you are choosing to reside. At the absolute least, use Google Translate when you approach someone to ask a question. Don't put the burden on local people to understand you. Number 6, minimize your impact. This one really gets to me, especially living on an island. I can't count the number of bright-eyed U.S. retirees that gleefully announced how they're buying land and building a home. That is, tearing down virgin forest, shipping in materials, adding pressure to the sewage and energy infrastructure, creating more trash, and just generally taking up resources without a second thought. It's not only environmentally destructive, but economically problematic. In Mexico, there's a lot of discourse around the ways in which this is driving up prices beyond what local salaries can match. International gentrification is a real issue. Yes, we all have to live somewhere. No, we do not have to build a 4-bedroom house on formerly untouched land that we plan to use as a quote-unquote investment property, driving up housing prices and catering to wealthy tourists half the year. Number 7. Support local economic well-being. And no, this doesn't just mean employing people to be servers and paying them minimum wage at the bar you opened for fun, even though you really don't need the income. Contribute to local nonprofits. Tip heavily. Patronize businesses that are owned by people from your new home. Fun fact, when I asked whether anyone had compiled a list of locally owned businesses in Cozumel in a Facebook group, some people had an entire meltdown. Don't be those people. Add rather than extracting. Number 8, embrace humility. I have seen more than one USer brag about how they are able to quote-unquote live like a king in Mexico because of how much further US dollars go here. Newsflash, most kings were tyrants. Moving to another country does not confer elite or royal status, so please stop acting as if the local community is supposed to be your court. I know the people who would say something like this are probably not my readers, and if they are, they won't accept this feedback. Nevertheless, I will write it. You're not any better or more important than anyone else. Neither am I. Number 9. If you want things to be like they are in the U.S., go back to the U.S. Listen, if you're going to constantly complain about the customs and conditions of your new home, maybe it's not the place for you. I'm not saying there's no space to introduce innovations and concepts or processes that might improve efficiency and well-being in your new home. In particular, if you've been hired to knowledge share and introduce successful governance or other strategies to the country of your new residents, great. But if you left the U.S. as a retiree or remote worker and no one is asking for your feedback on time management, infrastructure, or local bureaucracy, would you please stop comparing it to the U.S. and whining? Firstly, almost every problem you identify is likely a problem somewhere in the U.S. as well, and you just haven't been exposed to it. Secondly, I promise you the U.S. has problems your new home does not. Regular mass shootings in schools come to mind. Finally, coming to another country and expecting entire structures to acclimate to your preferences rather than the other way around stinks of imperialistic tendencies. If you want the U.S., go back to the U.S. I know this might sound harsh. It's not nearly as harsh as the treatment of U.S. immigrants in the future will be if we continue to show up as ugly Americans. Rightly so. And no, these are not really things I would say to most people who immigrate into the U.S. Don't even try to compare it, though I know some will. Immigration into the U.S. is prompted by many, many factors and includes people from very different socioeconomic backgrounds and levels of access to opportunity. One really can't make any sweeping statements about immigrants to the U.S. Immigrants to the U.S. include people fleeing war, gang corruption, extreme poverty, and human trafficking, as well as people with doctorates, intergenerational wealth, and political clout moving to the U.S. for business, marriage, or simply because they consider it the place to be. I suspect this is waning. Conversely, the trends I've seen among U.S. immigrants, in particular to Latin America, tend to exhibit consistency along the lines of these ugly American behaviors. They also appear to be driven by a desire to live, quote-unquote, cheaply, evade regulation, and get more than they give. People are tired. In the U.S. and out of it, people are tired of tolerating abuse, exploitation, rudeness, entitlement, inequity, extraction, appropriation, and hubris. Please, please don't be the U.S.'s worst kind of export. And that is the end. And actually, I'm realizing now that I originally wrote this on Medium in September 2023, which makes a lot more sense because that was a year in from our original emigration date. We left the U.S. in September 2022. So, yeah, a lot has transpired since then. And but these people are still out there doing what they do. I wrote something recently about a woman who was chasing people off the beach in front of some properties that were under construction that she evidently owned. Yeah, they're still out here. They're still doing what they do. And, you know, I think in general, people remember a negative experience much longer and allow negative experiences to color their overall perspective in deeper ways than they do positive experiences. I'm pretty sure that there's neuroscience that backs that up. And so when I see something like the article about the woman, and I'll post that one too here so you can see what I'm talking about. When I see those incidences, it's like for every one person that behaves that way and represents the United States in that way, you need like 20 other people to come and counter the impact of that on the perspective that is engendered by that behavior. So it's very damaging, it's very damaging when people do that. And as I work with people who are trying to emigrate from the US, even in the last 6 months since the inauguration, I've seen more reluctance and more difficulty for people trying to get residency visas in Latin American countries. And, I think that's a combination, obviously, of the geopolitical factors at play and the way in which the United States is exerting dominance over various countries, including in Latin America. But there's also an individual responsibility that we each have as people moving through the world, attached to that United States identity and that United States passport. So do better, do better. That's what we can do. That is the part of life that is within our control, is our own behavior and how we show up. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed How Not to Be an Ugly American, and let me know if you're enjoying these reads. I actually kind of like it. I think it's a nice additional thing. I won't stop writing. Writing is how I think, so I won't stop writing, but I may do more of these reads if I see that they are getting traction. Thanks all. Have a great day. Stay safe. Stay sane. Take good care. Cuídate.